Broadcasting from the campus of Salisbury University, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7, putting Delmarva first. It's time for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
Next month's municipal elections in Salisbury, they could very well change the political landscape of the city. Welcome back to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. This time will be the first time that the council members will be chosen by 5 individual districts, eliminating the old District 2. And they are all up for election exactly at the same time. But even before the balloting begins, the landscape has already changed. Council President Jake Day is running unopposed for mayor, while the Council Vice President Laura Mitchell has no opponent in District 5. But there's still some interesting wrinkles. The current mayor, Jim Ireton, we mentioned a moment ago, has decided to not seek re-election, but instead vie for the seat in District 4. And in District 3, Tim Spees, who was elected to the council, will be facing off against Councilmember Jack Heath, who was appointed after the departure of Terry Cohen. To get a sense of the candidates and a sense of where the city has been and where it is going, our in-studio guest is Greg Bassett. He's the editor and general manager of the Salisbury Independent, local newspaper here. And he has also been a long-time observer of city politics, also having served as the editor at the Salisbury Daily Times. And welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Well, before we get into each individual district, how do you, I think I mentioned, at the top, that this is really a sort of a reshuffling of the political deck. I mean, we've never seen anything like this before in Salisbury. We've got all these individual candidates running. Just overall, how do you see the effect of this big change?
It's going to be interesting that they've gone to the district system now. So specific neighborhoods will be represented by specific people on the council. And I've seen some of the issues change because of that. Things become much more hyper-local about roads and sidewalk repairs and things like that in specific neighborhoods. So candidates are speaking to that. I wonder about how turnout is going to affect things. It used to be you had District 1, which had very low turnout. Some of those races won by like 41 to 40 type votes. In District 2, the rest of the city, the magic number seemed to be around 700 votes that you needed to win. But there's going to be a lot fewer votes needed to win in these specific districts. So it's going to be a really interesting thing to watch in terms of turnout.
So let's turn to District 1. That's the African American district initially. The incumbent, Shani Shields, is running for re-election, and she's opposed again, actually, by April Jackson, amongst others. Lay out the candidates there, and what do you see the dynamics in that race?
Right. Now, April and Shani have run against each other before. I think the last time, the first balloting, Shani won, then April won, then Shani won, then April won, then Shani won, as they kept counting absentees and doing recounts. Both very interesting people. Shani's really, I think, come along in terms of her understanding of the city. She's the most senior member of the council now. She seems to have the most background. She remembers the issues. She's pretty good about understanding what's in the briefing book, and she speaks her mind very bluntly. She really does. April, also a very good candidate. She's the daughter of Billie Jean Jackson Sr., who is a very well-known, I guess you call him a local civil rights leader, who was actually the father of District 1, who helped push that. Her connections in the community are very deep. She's a very personable person. She's very popular. And she's also a very interesting candidate. The third one in there is Sarah Halcott, who is an artist, a local artist, she and her husband. She's very involved in the First Saturday, Third Friday events. She's very big in the artistic community with downtown. She's been a great spokesman for that. She's also an interesting candidate. She's asked some hard questions about the police and how they conduct themselves in her neighborhood. And again, she's a white woman in a majority district, which is interesting in itself.
What is the dynamics of that particular district or that particular area? I mean, it has changed obviously with the redrawing, but nonetheless, there's this contest that takes place. At first, it was against Von Ziggers, and then she held it for a long time, and now we have this sort of back and forth with April Jackson and Shani. What is it that separates these two candidates? Is it issues, or is it the people who support them? What's going on underneath?
I think there's a chronic feel in that district that the people are not properly represented before government. There's a suspicion of government. There's a suspicion of the police. The district also, it's drawn in now into North Camden, more of North Camden and over the President's Streets over by Pepsi. more of that area has been brought in. But I think these are people who feel like that they're left out of the process, so they look to their leader to give them the influence. But at the same time, they don't turn out to vote, and that's a shame. I do know that the church-going population is very heavy in that community. A lot of things are decided in the churches in a social way. So I think if you make yourself popular in that church, in the churches, and you're well known, that helps talk up your campaign and get you elected.
So turning to District 2, give us a rundown on that. I thought it was supposed to be the second, minority district. Is that right?
It is.
Yes.
It is also a minority district. And again, this is an area that it's interesting to me because it's the classic Church Street neighborhood is being represented in this. And you see that also as people didn't talk about Church Street for a long time. A lot of focus on the west side, a lot of focus on Camden, Newtown, but not a lot of focus on Church Street. And now you're going to have somebody who truly will represent Church Street. And there are 3 candidates in that race. You've got Kevon Arabi, who is very interesting. He's a guy who's running on a jobs platform as well. He's talking a lot about economic development and jobs and how poor people don't have access to jobs in that district. Marvin Ames, who ran for county council before in District 1, he is a candidate. He's a very compelling candidate. And Mira Boda, who is someone well known to city politics. Mira has run several times for several offices. He's a candidate in that district. And a newcomer, Justin Gregoli, is running. And unfortunately, I haven't met Mr. Gregoli yet. I hope to, but I have met and interviewed all the others.
So what is your assessment of say Ames and particularly and Arabi as well? How do they differ? You've now been able to talk to at least them.
Yeah, Arabi's running a completely different campaign. He's much more of academic type, and very focused on jobs and the national economy and how that trickles down into local stuff. So he's not a curbs and sidewalks kind of candidate. He seems to be much bigger thinking than that. Ames, it seems more of a typical neighbor in that community, and knows the people and is very involved in what goes on there, raises his family in that community. Mira Boda, who we all know, spans that entire community, has tried to run in that as a District 2 in the old District 2 before. It's fascinating to me because it's a strange district in that it's Church Street, and then the line is drawn all the way down to Tamarack Village. So it's a very narrowly constructed district. And again, you've got 4 candidates in there, and I wonder what turnout is going to do to that. You might have another situation where 40 votes wins the city council seat.
So is in both of these districts that we talk 1 and 2, how significant is the issue of crime and the relationship with the police department? Because that has come to the fore. We obviously seen in this on a national level. It's certainly a lot of attention spent there. And we heard the mayor just a moment ago talking about how that there needs to be some kind of adjustment in terms of that relationship. And he particularly not only talked about the police, but he also talked about the African-American community as well as getting a change and somehow it relates to the police. How significant is that issue in these 2 districts?
One of the great things about being a reporter is when you talk to candidates like this, you learn of what's going on in the neighborhoods that you didn't know before. And I definitely get a sense that the community policing aspects have eroded somehow. And I want to talk to Chief Duncan about this to see if it's really true. But there's a perception that people don't seem to know the local cop in their neighborhood like they maybe did a few years ago. Crime is way down. The city's done a great job in terms of solving a lot of its crime problems and being very active. You have to give Chief Duncan and her staff a lot of credit in that regard. But there is more suspicion. I think some of it filters in from the national discussion on police action. Everyone has an anecdote that they tell where they've had a bad encounter with a police officer. Those stories seem to get told more than the good encounters that people have with police officers. But you do see this constant suspicion where officers roll up to a scene and someone wants to tell them what really happened and they don't want to hear it. They're on their own investigation track. They're trying to do things in a very sterile way. Some of that human contact changes because it's much more serious than perhaps people want to think sometimes. And I think that adds to some of the stress and the tension. And you see these candidates talking about this. The other issue is the juvenile crime in Salisbury right now. The mayor said recently that if it's not nailed down in this city, some kid's going to steal it. We do see these petty crimes involving juveniles. We see kids running all over town. I get a lot of calls. People want to know why kids are riding wheelies in the middle of traffic. Some people say that's a gang initiation thing or just a group initiation, just proving some sort of a merit that way. But people wonder what's going on with the kids, which has led to this curfew discussion, why kids are out running around. And you hear a lot about that from the candidates as well.
By the way, all the candidates that you've talked to, I don't know whether this came up or not, did they all favor the curfew in one fashion or another?
Most of them, they're mixed. A few of them are in favor, and I don't remember exactly who's who. But I think there's mostly a wait-and-see approach on this. Logistics of the program are so daunting in terms of holding the kids and the hours and what it would do. But I think everyone agrees that they want the police to have another tool at their disposal to deal with juveniles, and that the curfew might be that.
I want to turn to District 3, which I think is probably most interesting in the sense that we've got Jack Heath, who was actually appointed to the position on the city council when Terry Cohen departed. But then we also have him running against Tim Spies, who's already been elected. And the striking character, or at least characteristic for me, is that Heath was appointed and Spies was elected. Break this race down, and will that dynamic make perhaps Spies maybe the odds-on favorite because people did turn out? I mean, what do you think?
Right. I can't handicap this one because I don't know, but it was interesting when they drew those lines that they put both Jake Day and Jack Heath and Tim Spies all in the same district. So Jake bailed and ran for mayor. That was pretty obvious. So you end up with two sitting council members actually facing off in a very tight district. District 3 is interesting. It's the Salisbury University area district. It's the classic Salisbury residential. It's the prettiest part of the city, I think. Very close community. They've got some town and gown issues, typical neighborhood issues. They fringe onto Fruitland, but a very stable neighborhood for sure. Going to be a high turnout, but who they vote for is going to be interesting. Jack Heath is the classic local businessman who is in all the service clubs. Tim Spies is sort of a sophisticated, erudite kind of guy who's been kind of a rebel, but he seems to play along better lately under this council, which is interesting. Both very smart guys, very compelling. The third person in that race is Kevin Lindsay. He's an African-American who's in the race. He, again, has talked a lot about jobs and the perceptions and what the community can do better to sell itself and market itself. He's very concerned about families who live in that district. So you don't hear about Spies and Heath talking as much about families as you do Kevin Lindsay. Going to be really interesting. I can't really handicap it. I think Tim Spies was a good sport in terms of allowing. He didn't fight the redistricting as much as he probably could have. He knew he was going to have to run against Jack Heath, and he seems eager and willing to do that.
Do you see, by the way, a difference in their approach to council issues? Because Spies initially certainly was aligned, it seems to me, with a majority that was represented by Debbie Campbell and Terry Cohen. And, of course, they've now departed. Is there a hangover from that in terms of policy as opposed to, say, somebody like Jack Heath? Or how do you read that?
Right.
How are they doing on the council?
That's a great question. I hadn't thought about it, but I do see that. I see Tim Spies as being someone who goes back and talks to people and gets their reaction to what the council's up to, what they're thinking. And so I think those people's voices are in his head all the time. I think Jack Heath takes a more of a businessman approach where he's showing leadership and he knows what he wants to do. And he asks, like in the budget, he asks the businessman type questions, the kind of questions my boss would ask reading a P&L about how things happened and why. So I think he takes a much more business approach, much more Chamber of Commerce, Rotary type approach to the stuff. I think kind of contrasting characters.
And finally, of course, we have the fourth district. And how do you see this one? We just had a moment ago. If you heard Mayor Jim Ireton, who is running and has decided to choose that seat as opposed to Roger Mazzullo. What do you make of that district? Are we to assume that because the mayor has already been in office, people voted for him, that's shoo-in, or how do you read it?
Don't know. I think I would have thought there might be some resentment that Jim gave up on being mayor in order to seek a safer council seat, that people might kind of be, negative about it that way. But Jim's an articulate spokesman for the neighborhoods. He really cares about the neighborhoods. And he talks about, Jake Day, who as mayor talks about, bricks and mortar in downtown. And Jim's like, well, what about the neighborhoods? So he keeps bringing it up. He keeps getting in fights with landlords. His rent control issue right now is getting a lot of discussion. The council will talk about that on Monday night. They're gonna raise that. I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but they're going to talk about it a lot. But Jim's a neighborhood guy. Roger Mazzullo seems very affable. I don't know if he's ready to take on Jim. Jim is so deeply tied into that community. That's his base. He's always worked to serve them. Even as mayor, maybe took care of his neighborhood, that Johnson Lake neighborhood, better. He ran for council before 15, 18 years ago. Whenever he was on the council, he was elected from those voters before. and everyone knows him. He's just got the name recognition. So I think Roger's definitely got an uphill battle in that.
Do you see, so what kind of issues do you see separating these two? I mean, obviously we have, I guess, the neighborhood stabilization, rent control. I guess
Right.
that's the split. And particularly as we were listening to the two interviews, do you see some real great divide here between the two?
Yeah, I think you heard Roger talk about jobs. Again, I've been fascinated how many of the candidates bring up jobs, because you don't think of that really as a local issue. You think of it as a state, national, regional kind of thing. Local candidates talking about job creation, which has been interesting. Roger talked about that, and then Roger also talked about economic development to a great degree. But if you look at Jim, he's got every little issue nailed down, and he's got a position paper on everything from the Wycomico River to storm drainage to what kind of sewer plan we should have, to what the rents should be, to what restaurants we should encourage downtown. He's definitely much more focused on specific issues based on feedback that he gets from voters.
By the way, if Jim were to be elected to the council, I mean, because I brought this up at the end, as it were, the issue of tension, temperament, that kind of thing. You were around, I assume you were around maybe perhaps the first time around when I was around. How do you, when I was talking to the mayor, the one thing the sense I got was that he was going to be the, if nothing else, the lone voice or the conscience of the council when it came particularly to neighborhoods. I mean, how do you see that playing out?
I'm a little worried about it, but it's really up to Jim what he does. Jim can get pretty dramatic about some stuff and do some grandstanding and get kind of huffy and storm out of meetings. He's been known to do that, but he's got a passion, so you have to respect that to a great degree. I think the others on the council, there's some history there, and there's not always milk and honey everywhere you look. So I think there's some people who are suspicious on them. A couple council members told me that they kind of resented this rent control thing coming up at the time that it did, right in the middle of the election cycle. There was some questions about, him using city employees to prepare the report. He's still doing his job as mayor. He's not going to stop being mayor. So I understand that in his defense. But I think that there are some on there they've worked with Jim for 9 or 10 years, and they're ready for him to maybe move on. And he's not. He's going to be part of them now. Whether he can get elected council president, I kind of doubt that, but I don't know.
Right.
He would be a great council leader. So then you have Jake and Jim basically switching jobs. But it's really up to Jim how he wants to work on that council, whether he wants to be the lone wolf and protect the neighborhoods, or if he wants to try to work with the collective. And I do see that collective working harder and harder to get along. They've either band-aided up or covered up a lot of their differences, and they do have a very civil working relationship on that council. I have to give them a lot of credit.
Do you think the era in which the council seemed to, as some critics might have say, impose their own particular vision on the mayor and encroached on the executive branch, as opposed to the executive branch carrying it out? I know that's been one of the debates that's been going on for a while. Has that now, do you think that question has been settled?
Well, it's interesting. I see people applying policy to the personalities, which is always backwards. So in other words, you always had a strong mayor in Salisbury, and that's just the way Salisbury was. Barry Parsons-Tillman gets elected, and suddenly we need a city manager because, we can't trust her to be mayor. That's their perception. So we spend 4 years on a city manager battle. It goes to referendum. It loses. Barry goes. Jim comes in. Jim is busy. Jim, by now, the salary for mayor is what, $30,000 or $35,000. It's difficult for anyone to just be the mayor. So Jim has another job. He works as mayor. He's considers himself a full-time mayor. He's probably more of a part-time mayor. He's back and forth. He's certainly a strong leader, but you've got a great person who is the city administrator, and Tom Stevenson, who runs those people really well. So you have a strong mayor, but you haven't seen a totally focused mayor. Well, now we're going to have Jake Day in, who everyone seems to love. There's sort of a coronation that's been underway for him for 6 months. He's going to be an aggressive person. He's not going to have another job other than be the mayor. Someone even told me the other day, like, well, once we get Jake in, we can bump that salary up now to $75,000 or $80,000 and make it a real job. So I'm going to be watching that one closely if they're able to do that. But I think you will see that job will again evolve, even though all the rules are there for it, will evolve again based on that personality. I think people are going to trust him to really take a strong leadership role. Whether it's earned yet or not, we'll see how he earns it. But I think there's going to be much more power in the mayor's seat, a little less power on the council. I think Jake has helped to make the council more powerful through his own personality. The question is he going to try to run it all? I'm gonna watch that because when you have egos can get out of control a little bit.
That's right.
It's really hard to do, and we'll see whether he has the right temperament and learning experience curve to do all that exactly the way that he wants to.
So I was going to say, I mean, in some ways, today's agenda in terms of revitalization, in terms of a lot of the issues that have come up, they didn't seem to differ a whole lot necessarily from Ireton. I mean, the approach was different, the temperament was different, but the trajectory seemed to be going forward in the same direction. Is that how you read this?
I can see that, and when I've asked that before, people have told me that that Jake's influence has shaped Ireton's goals. So some of the things that Jake has put forward, Ireton has embraced those as sort of his own issues. And when Jim was elected, he was really elected on the neighborhoods and on the Wycomico River progress. Jake's bricks and mortar. He's downtown, one building at a time. When you walk around downtown with Jake, he's like, this is this building, and this is the purpose that we see for it. And he's going to work with developers and others to make that happen. And that's a completely new approach, I think, to city politics. But Salisbury does also have a people problem. There's homeless people that wander around downtown. There's issues there around the hospital with some people in that area. People just sort of hanging out, and the people who are in downtown who see it every day ask about that. My daughter the other day said she doesn't like to go to the library because she has to walk past kind of some weird people at the entrance to the library. They don't seem like weird people to me, but something struck her about the group that hangs out in front of the library that bothers her. So that might be an issue. So there's some people thinks it's a beautiful library, but if you've got kind of creepy guys sitting around out front of it, that could be a problem. Or you need to educate your community a little bit better about who those people are and why they're there, and that they're not creepy guys.
By the way, we have Laura Mitchell. She's, of course, the council vice president, running unopposed. How do you see her future and how she fits into what we see could happen on the council and the mayorship?
She's the council vice president now. It's presumed that she'll be elected council president. In the old days, whoever got the most votes in District 2 in the citywide district was the candidate to be the city council president. Sometimes they would alternate it. She could be the council president. It seems that way. She's strong enough on the council. I was afraid I called her the mom of the council the other day. I was afraid I was going to insult her, but she's got sort of a mom sensibility to things. She brings in a sort of an emotional, a practical element to stuff. She's a CPA by training, so she's really good with numbers, and she thinks that way. She seems to be strong in marketing. She's got lots of marketing ideas. So I think she's probably going to be the president, and how else it shakes out, I don't know. I think Jack Heath would like to be president if he's reelected. It's going to be interesting to watch that. Jack and Jake seem to work together really well.
So do you think that the divisions that we've seen in the past, we had obviously Camden neighborhoods, we had the whole issue over 4-2, 4-3, all those kinds of issues that I certainly saw lead to a whole set of dynamics that lots of tension, so on. Have those now begun to disappear, or are they running underneath the surface?
I think they have. I think a lot of it has to do with the city's performing better revenue-wise in terms of its taxation, so there aren't the money problems that there were. There's some great capital things that are underway that help make them feel better about what they're doing. Crime is down, so you've got that. The blogosphere is not beating the heck out of them every day anymore, which you can argue whether that was real or not. It certainly was in their heads and affected how they felt about what they were doing. And the civility is there. There just seems to have been a decision somewhere in the group to let the mayor do his job and run the administration and not nitpick him on every little number. We're not going to try to run the city ourselves. We're going to watch what goes on and represent constituents and not go in there and play chief financial officer, which you would see. They don't seem to badger the city employees for information like the city employees complained about before. So I just think the council's probably back doing its job better. And for whatever reason, whether it's real or not, they seem to get along. They seem to respect each other.
What do you see as for the future of the city as we go forward? I mean, obviously we're going to have some growth, and we heard a moment ago talking about bringing jobs in. Everybody's talking about bringing jobs in. Debate as to what kind of jobs those will be. We obviously have the situation in neighborhoods and the rent. That doesn't seem like it's going to go away no matter what solution that there is. How do you see those issues playing out in the city?
There's going to be some great focus on downtown. We had a story in our paper this week that Lot 1, finally the negotiations are getting near the end on that to develop some retail and residential housing there in that big parking lot between the downtown plaza and where the library is. That's going to certainly invigorate the heart of Delmarva. When you look at Lot 7, Lot 11, whatever it is out on Route 13, another great plan for that. They're far away on that, though. But when you see those plans, you see the vision of what could be new and done downtown. And, of course, the streetscape, or whatever it's called, the new Main Street plan, they're going to start tearing up for that soon. So we're going to get a whole new Main Street with new sidewalks and all kinds of trees and bushes and stuff, and a new lighting campaign, like different lights, so that it all makes sense. So there's some continuity downtown. It's going to be a different place here in 2 years, just in the downtown. Jake Day proposes and is adamant that you start from the center and you work your way out. One thing I was fascinated, they were able to come up with an ordinance that might close the adult bookstores along Route 13, or at least force them to move to another part of town. And just what does that do to a community to see an adult bookstore, especially the one that's been there at the S-curve in Salisbury for so long? Is that something that identifies Salisbury? Is that what people think of when they think of Salisbury? Little things like that, I think, are going to make a difference.
We've been speaking with Greg Bassett. He is the editor and general manager of Salisbury Independent, also a long time with the Salisbury Daily Times. Been looking at the election and some of the candidates, and we'll be talking to the candidates as we move through the month. And Greg, we appreciate you taking time to speak with us.
Thank you, Don.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
This has been Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Chris Rank produces and is our audio engineer. Don Rush is your host. For podcasts, visit our website, delmarvapublicradio.net, or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on PAC 14. To view the schedule, view the Daily Times, or visit pac14.org.